Man Enough to Listen by Herbert Fenner. Introduction. When I began writing this book, I realized that life was not just about me. I wasn't thinking about how I could get ahead and what others could do for me. I decided to look outside myself, and what I discovered was devastating. I discovered that women from all walks of life had something in common, and that commonality was they needed to be heard. So what I decided to do was listen. I gave an attentive ear to what our women had to say, and boy, did my skin crawl. I listened as women shared their story. Their story was unique and mostly painful. The pain they suffered ran deep, and I mean deep. What I found to be even more painful was how and who caused their pain. Would you believe that our women's pain was caused by men who looks like you? Yes, you wearing the prison suit, the business suit, and the Sunday suit. We are responsible for destroying their dreams, shattering their hope, and some even taking their lives. Right now, our women, your woman has something to say. She has been quiet long enough, and now it's time for my brothers to sit down and listen. You will hear stories that will speak directly to your heart. Women have decided to speak out, and I hope that you are man enough to listen to what they have to say. The stories you will hear are the voices that we have chosen to ignore. These are not voices that are being screamed from afar. These are the voices that lies next to you at night. The voices of those who believed in you, loved you. These are the voices that deserve to be heard, and I trust that you are man enough to listen. Man Enough to Listen. Chapter 1. When I walked into the 2-story townhome, it was almost frightening. The long stares and impish looks made my skin crawl. I felt like a fish out of water. I felt like I had committed an unpardonable sin, and maybe I did. But somebody had to be the sacrifice. Somebody had to set our women free. Far too long, women from all walks of life have remained silent or been ignored when it came to telling their story. From the look of discontent and disdain on these women's faces, I knew it was time. It was time for the world, and men in particular, to shut up and listen. When God gave vocal cords, the women were not excluded. Therefore, they have a right to speak, and we as men need to listen. As the women began to take their seats in the living room, I noticed that there was a chair sitting directly in the center of the circle. I thought that would be the chair the women sit in as they took turns sharing their story. But I was totally wrong. The chair in the circle, my brothers, is for you. For now, I'm going to take your place. I'm going to represent all the men who these women wish to speak to. While you listen to these women, I hope that you will be man enough to listen. I hope that you will be humble enough, caring enough, and human enough to join me and take your seat. Making my way to the middle of the circle, I noticed all the women were wearing name tags. All the name tags were adjectives. They were very descriptive. They were names like bitter, angry, reticent, hopeless, indifferent, fearful, disappointment, etc. I felt a lump in my throat as I went around the circle reading them all. The expression on these women's faces bore witness to the characteristics in which they had played. They were tired but not quitters. They were ready to bounce back from the pain and abuse they had suffered. These women, gentlemen, were ready to rewrite their story. Quietly raising my hand, I gave notice that I had something to share. I was quite aware that I was only there to listen. But what I had to share wasn't about me. What I had to share was about a special woman in my own life that I held dear. Since the women were rewriting their story, I thought it would be appropriate to tell them about my favorite author. First getting approval and then the women's attention, I began. Throughout the course of my life, I had the opportunity as well as the privilege of reading books written by the world's most renowned and respected authors. I'm speaking about the type of art which reveals the mind of its master. I've read poetry, drama, fiction, non-fiction, and self-help books. But there is but one story written by my favorite author that excels them all. My favorite author is none other than my mother. And her best-selling story is not the one she sold, but the story she told. Without pen or paper, my mother writes her story. My mother's story is not one-dimensional. My mother's story is of a unique genre, but not complex. As a young girl sitting on the stoop wearing her favorite yellow dress, indicative of her innocence, my mother's life was like a dream, a fairy tale. My mother's life had only known 2 seasons, summer and spring. Holding a daisy in her hand, my mother recognized the scent. It was the scent of her own innocence, the scent of life as it blossoms. With a smile as bright as the rising sun, my mother rose from the stoop of her innocence into an unexpected winter. My mother's dreams had been deferred, violated but not by a stranger. My mother's innocence was soon lost, and the fresh scent of life began to dissipate. Cold and aloof, my mother's dreams had become a nightmare. Her bright smile had been chased away, while the stench of her shame permeated a soul that was once pure. Hiding in the darkness of her secrets and her fears, she contemplated on leaving a world that was so cold. She made many attempts, but with no success. For years, my mother searched for love only to find abuse. She searched for the sun that once shined so brightly only to find rain. The 2 seasons, spring and summer, had temporarily been lost, but soon to be found. Like an invading army, the sun began to shine, and a scent of life filled my mother's soul. Her smile had returned, chasing away her shame. For the first time, my mother had found love. The love my mother found is unlike any other love. The sparkle in her eyes revealed the joy in her soul. The love my mother found changed her life and allowed her to rewrite her story. Because of the love my mother found, she was able to forgive those who abused her. My mother was able to look me, her son, in the eyes and quote, "Well, son, I tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor bare. But all the time, I've been climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark. But there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps 'cause you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I still going, honey. I still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair." This poem was written by Langston Hughes, but was lived by my mother, my favorite author. My mother rewrote her story without pen or paper. The love my mother found made it possible for her dream to dream again and enjoy the fragrance of her innocence. But who is this love my mother found? To that question I have to say that you will have to ask my favorite author. Without notice, the looks of disdain and discontent had changed into looks of acceptance. The women realized that I understood what they were faced with. These women were faced with the opportunity of a lifetime. They all had the opportunity to rewrite their story. Tears streamed down their faces as they digested my story about my favorite author. They could relate to the abuse, the change of seasons, and the desire to end their story. They were also able to relate to the moral of the story, which is, it's your story, and you can rewrite it if you want to. After the sobs stopped, the room was filled with silence. Reaching toward me, the woman with the name tag, disappointed, handed me a tag that said negligent. As each woman spoke, I was going to wear the name of those who were responsible for their pain, hanging the name tag around my neck. I listened to disappointed.